Thanks for joining us for the increasingly inaccurately named Samsung Internet Office Hours. This started as an idea to do a physical office hours, and we quite quickly changed that into a virtual office hours. So none of us are in an office, obviously, and this is longer than an hour. So so I don't even know why we're keeping the name, but you know, it's a good name to keep for now. Just to let people know, we are operating under the Samsung Create Code of Conduct, and I left a link to that on the Zoom chat. I'm gonna link it again. Just to make sure that we keep the entire event very welcoming and friendly and harassment free. So I encourage you, I mean, if you sign up for the event, you already saw the link to the Code of Conduct. The enforcement policy for the Code of Conduct is please, if you want to escalate something, private message myself or one of the other Samsung people on the call, and we will deal with it up to and including ejecting somebody from the call if necessary. So with having said that, the Samsung people on the call are myself. I'm Dan Appelquist. There's maybe I can just say names and people can unmute and introduce and just say hi. There's Ada.
Hi.
Okay. There's Laura.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. And Laura's going to be playing a moderator role later as well. There's Kevin.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Kevin, coming in from Switzerland. And on today's call, we're going to start off with a conversation with a good friend of mine and somebody that I've been working with for a number of years in W3C land, and that is Dominique Hazael-Massieux, or Dom, as we call him. And the format for today is that we're going to have a conversation. And during that conversation, please, everybody who's on the call, feel free to interject things, feel free to raise questions. If something is said, if somebody uses an acronym and you don't know what that acronym is, leave something on the chat. If you have something else to add, feel free to add it on the chat. I might call on you to unmute yourself and interject something into the conversation as well. And then we'll go in, after that portion of the call, we'll go into Q&A where we really engage with people. So Q&A is open throughout the whole call, but in the second part of the call, it's officially the Q&A part. And if you like, feel free to introduce yourself in the Zoom chat anyway, and just say what you're doing while we're having the first part of the chat as well, so that we can all get to know each other. I think some of the people on this call probably know each other already. So having said all that, thanks, Dom, for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Dan.
Great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about what you're working on right now, and then we can kind of get into discussing some of the things that we wanted to talk about, including like what's new in web standards, what's new and how W3C is reaching out to developers, and what's new in the world of werewolves and simple villagers. And we can explain that in a little bit later, but please.
Yeah, so my name is indeed, I'm impressed by your pronunciation, Dan, Dominique Hazael-Massieux, but most people just call me Dom and invite everybody to do that. So I'm part of the W3C staff. Hopefully most people on this call will know that W3C is this organization doing standards for the web, CSS, JavaScript APIs, and so And WCC has a full-time staff, permanent staff, to help with its operations, including a technical staff whose role is to make sure that the standards we build and that hopefully many of you use build toward a somewhat consistent platform and not just a set of random APIs and technologies put together. So WCC has a staff of around, I guess, 50 people, and I've been one of them for longer than I care to to admit. As part of that job, I've been indeed working with Dan for quite a few years in various roles and positions. In WCC, I have several roles. One, which probably explains why I'm here today, is that I'm working with my colleague Marie, who might be joining us later, on our developer relation efforts. The reason WCC has a developer relationship effort is that everything we build, the standards we build them for them to be used by developers on the line. And so we want to make sure that whatever we build is actually usable and used by developers, which includes making sure developers get a voice in the process of building this standard. So that's one of my hats, the developer efforts. I'm also directly involved in some of our technical standardization efforts. In particular, I'm involved in the immersive web effort with Ada, who joined earlier. I'm involved in the work around WebRTC, real-time communication on the web, which is seeing quite a bit of usage the past few weeks, given the circumstances. And there is also a number of other efforts that I'm more in the static phase, but we can discuss them later, like machine learning on the web, web transport, web and networks.
So WebRTC is obviously getting a lot of press these days and a lot of interest as people are moving lots of things online. Have you, has W3C felt that pressure at all?
I guess it has had some impacts in the way the working group is operating. First, whenever we build standards for the web, we have a very strong commitment to not break backwards compatibility. When we bring a change to a specification because of any reason, we want to make sure we don't break existing code. But sometimes there is some leeway, like if you think something has only been used very little, you can say, yeah, maybe we can adjust this, it won't break too many sites, or it can be fixed quickly. In the case of WebRTC, there are a number of things we wish we could fix, but in the current period, given that it has become mission critical for so many people right now, we are taking an even more cautious approach to the kind of changes we are considering. And it also opens some conversations with projects, people, companies that have been using WebRTC, but using without necessarily participating to the standardization efforts, because now that they are getting, I guess, more usage, more of the spotlight, then they're also interested in making sure that what's coming next with WebRTC actually delivers what they see as needed for their users, their customers.
Okay. Are there, in terms of, you mentioned developers and getting getting developers more involved in W3C work. I mean, are there any initiatives that you're doing right now? I noticed, I don't know if you did it, but I noticed W3C opened up a Slack channel.
Yeah, let me put actually the invite on the chat in case people want to join. So I know as I guess can be imagined, W3C is already a very distributed organization. We have people from all over the world, not just the staff, but all of our participants in the standardization efforts are from all over the place. And although we used to have face-to-face meetings on a regular basis, most of the work was already happening in a very distributed fashion over GitHub, over IRC mailing list. But given the recent circumstances around the COVID-19, which created, I guess, new barriers for people to have more casual type of interactions, we very recently opened this Slack instance where everyone is invited to join as long as they behave with our code of conduct. And yeah, it has actually proved, I think, quite a useful new mode of interaction, one more engaging, I guess, than IRC, which is starting to show its age, and less structures than or mailing list or GitHub, which are really meant for work, less for casual exchanges. So yeah, do feel free to join. It's still brand new. We are still shaping it as people join and bring their ideas, their questions. But it's a good way to get also a feel of the community.
And what how are you expecting people? Are you expecting the people that join that community on Slack to be mostly people that are already participating in W3C working groups or community groups? Or are you expecting kind of more developers? You are trying to reach out to more developers who are not yet engaged in the standardization process.
So I guess my overall goal in W3C is to blurry that boundary as much as possible. Clearly, some people, work on a day-to-day for or W3C work. Some people will just post, one issue every X months. But my hope, my goal is that more and more people, even if they don't feel that they can or should get involved on a daily basis, that they should feel empowered to participate and to get involved. And so to your specific question, yes, this Slack is open to anyone. It will be based on what people join, basically. And I understand that sometimes joining a community you don't know is a bit intimidating. So I don't know yet how many non-regular folks will join, but yeah, absolutely everyone is involved. It may be that if we get lots of new people joining, we'll also have to bring some more structures, some dedicated channels and so on. But so far, I think last time I looked, we had about 150 participants on that Slack, and the more the merrier.
So for people that aren't familiar with how standards are made, and I feel like for people, for you and for me, we've been participating in W3C efforts for a while. There's a lot of kind of like assumed knowledge. I think most developers who are working on the web platform or who are working on building websites, web services, web applications, find the standards process and kind of opaque. And I think that what you're talking about is that some of the efforts that you've been talking about so far are aimed at trying to make that effort less opaque. But I mean, can you talk through like, how does the work happen right now? What also people might have a kind of out of date version of what standards, how standards operate. I mean, the way, from my perspective, I feel like the way that standards are built has been completely reinvented in the last 5-6 years, since, especially with moving most of the things over from mailing list environments over into GitHub issues. But can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I should say, I think one of the most fundamental changes is the one you've just described. Today, absolutely all of our standardization effort, which is, practically speaking, writing specifications that then gets implemented by browser vendors, all of our standardization efforts happen within GitHub repositories. Not all of them, but most of them are under the GitHub the W3C organization on GitHub. Let me put the link on the chat. And if you go there, you'll see that there is over 700 repositories. Not all of them are for specifications, because we also have software projects and other type of collaboration that we use GitHub for. But everything we do happen on GitHub. What that means is that the specifications themselves are HTML files that are updated via pull requests that gets reviewed by the community behind any of the specific standard. We gather feedback and input for features as GitHub issues, and we get to discuss these issues via the GitHub interface. So I guess one of the reasons we migrated all of our standardization effort there is that to facilitate developers' input, knowing that developers, for the most part, will already be at least somewhat familiar with GitHub, then they know what it takes to create an issue. They know how to watch evolution on a repository. They can even bring pull requests if they feel like it. And pull requests can be from the most trivial thing, like you found a typo once reading a spec, you can get it fixed, and that's always very appreciated, up to more substantive changes. Although this one obviously require usually a bit more involvement with the working group behind the spec. So yeah, that's, I mean, to maybe make that a shorter story, overall, the spec development effort is looking a lot more like a software development effort in terms of the tool and workflows that we've been adopting over the past few years, including in particular GitHub, where most of the work is happening.
Right. And now what about the different ways in which the different types of groups that W3C has?
Yeah, so there are, I guess, 4 or 5 different type of groups, but I'll focus on the 2 main ones that people will care about on this call, I think. So I've said the Rtc is doing standardization for the web. But that can mean different things to different people. There is a very formal aspect to standardization, and that formal aspect is, making sure that people agree on what's going to ship for the 4 billion of users that use the web through their devices every day. That's a very heavy responsibility, not one that we take lightly, and that takes a level of formality to make sure that this is strong consensus, that we've achieved all the values that we want to embody in our standards, like making sure they are accessible, that they respect the privacy, the security of our users, that they are available across languages and culture, that they are internalization friendly. So that set of values is embodied by, again, a fairly formal standardization process. And that process is applied in what we call our working groups. So working groups in the Rtc are the groups that are put in place to create web standards. Again, they go through a very well-defined standard, and they are only open, for some definition of only, to W3C members. So you have to be a W3C member before you can join.
And that your organization has to be a W3C member. Yeah.
The membership in W3C is through organizations. So that's the first type of group, working groups, and they do proper standards. But some 8 years ago, we started a different program, a set of groups we call community groups. And there are over, I should know, but more than 100 and possibly more.
A lot
of such groups. And these groups are made for pre-standardization processes. In particular, what we call the incubation process. As I said, doing the formal job of standardizing a technology takes a lot of effort, resources, needs some level of formality, which is, again, important given our responsibility, but can also be costly if you start doing a standard and you realize you didn't have the real problem in mind, you were missing requirements, you got it wrong. And even in the bad circumstances, you can have a great idea that ends up being wrong. And to recognize the fact that you need room for more agility, more experimentation in our standardization process, we've put in place this community group program where anybody can join, anybody can bring their ideas, anybody can participate in the discussion, understanding that this is for experimental ideas, not things that you'll necessarily end up finding in your browser. It may be that it sounded nice initially, but it won't go anywhere because of this or that issue, because in fact it has too many privacy or security issues. So community groups, again, they are open to anyone. So even if you're not part of a W3C member organization, you can join any of these group, create any of these group, participate to any of these group. And among these very many community groups, there is, I guess, a more special one, the Web Platform Incubator Community Group, also known as YCG, whose main mode of operation is a discourse forum. And in particular, I would encourage anyone that would want to suggest a new feature for a browser, a new CSS feature, a new API, a new approach to doing web development. If they don't think or don't know if anyone is working on it, to go to that forum, try to explain their use case, what it is that they want to achieve, maybe even demonstrate that this is something that is already being kind of done elsewhere. And then you'll get accompanied to see if and how that idea can go forward. Again, there is no expectation that all ideas will be adopted, but many of these ideas end up either being adopted as is or serve as inspiration for a different approach to solving the similar issue.
So I feel one of the community groups that I am sometimes pointing out as a success story of the community group working group process is the the immersive web work, which is producing, among other things, the WebXR specification, and that's something that Ada's been playing a chairmanship role in the working group. But and it's something that we've been engaging in quite a lot. But one of the reasons that I like that story is because it involves a group of people who initially had a kind of kooky idea of let's add augmented reality and virtual reality to the web. And this was not necessarily, it wasn't mainstream, but they brought some of these ideas to the community group. They incubated them in the community group. They came up with some stuff, and then to take it to the next level and actually go through the more formal standardization process, W3C spun up a working group. It actually led to more organizations joining W3C, which is good for the health of the organization, I think. And and now we actually have WebXR, the WebXR technology rolling out on browsers this year. It just, it's in the beta that we just announced at Samsung Internet, and that working group has participation from many other all the other browsers basically in it as well, which that's also seems like a success story. So it feels like, to me, that's something that we ought to be talking about more and trying to encourage people that have new technologies, that what they want to bring to the web, to kind of emulate that model. Would you agree? What do you think?
No, I very strongly disagree with that, Dan. No. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what community groups were built for, and we've seen. I think at this stage, I mean, the program now is, as I said, 8 years old. We've seen a very good number of success stories. So I mentioned the YCG, and YCG has brought a number of proposals up to the standardization process. You've mentioned the immersive web community group, and indeed that's very close to my heart. I've been working with that community in bringing it to standardization. And yeah, the immersive web is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen similar things happening with WebAssembly, more recently WebGPU, which is a new way to bring both high performance 3D and also high performance parallel computing to the web. This is right now in the community groups, but should be coming to the formal standardization process very soon. And we've seen working groups doing it the other way around. That is, they started as a formal W3C working group, but they want to have a space for incubating new ideas with more people participating, input from a broader community with less of the process formality. So for instance, the Web Audio Working Group, which is doing the Web Audio API that lets you do really nice thing with audio on the web. That group started a companion community group a few months ago, precisely to get input from the many developers out there that are doing that are using web audio to do really fancy audio applications in browsers, and make sure that we address all the features and use cases that were not part of the current web audio API.
Actually, speaking of that, I was talking to somebody recently who's working on a web application that combines WebRTC and web audio in an interesting way. They were working on something to enable a book club type application within using WebRTC, and to make it more personal, using web audio to spatially locate the different people that you're talking to on the screen, so that you had a more naturalistic feel. It's those kind. I love it when I hear about those kinds of applications that combine different W3C or different web technologies, web standards technologies together in a way that maybe the developers of the application didn't, or the developers of the original specification really didn't think about. That shows the power of the web to me. That kind of thing.
My favorite current example on this is Mozilla Hubs. So Mozilla Hubs is a 3D virtual space that you can join via your browser, either using a regular desktop or mobile browser, or that you can use through a virtual reality headset. And it's a social space, so you can have multiple people joining a single room, and then their audio transmitted via WebRTC gets specially located based on where they are in the virtual world. So it's a really very impressive combination of all these technologies working together, and it gives such an immersive feeling for something that you can join just through the click of a link. I mean, to me, it's like the web in one application. And as you say, I've been in WebRTC, doing WebRTC work for 8 or 9 years now. And when we started this effort, we wanted to enable this, which is already great, right? But bringing this together with specially located audio, with immersive web, and all of these technologies that are coming together, that wasn't part of the roadmap. It's still not part of our roadmap looked at from a purely WebRTC perspective. But yeah, that's one of the strengths of the web platform, because it lets you develop applications with all these features together, again, just at the click of the link. To me, it's wonderful.
I mean, that's certainly why I got involved in it, and obviously, like well, maybe not obviously, but like a lot of the work that I'm involved in W3C because of my co-chairing of the technical architecture group is looking at trying to make sure that those different technologies fit together in an appropriate way so that it's easier to use them together. It must be possible and easy to use those technologies together in a coherent way, and in the same architecture, that kind of thing. So let's see. Do we have any questions on the chat? Would anybody like to chime in on anything that we've just been discussing? Anything you want to ask Dom? Jory, you look like you have a question.
I was just smiling because I'm always the one with a bunch of questions, and so I usually sit. So, Don, one of the things that I'm interested.
Before we, sorry, can I ask you and everybody who asks a question, please introduce yourself and just let us know kind of like who you are, where you're dialing in from, and what what your interests or affiliation or what have you is, that kind of thing. Yeah, Jory.
Hi, I'm Jory Verson. I'm dialing in from Somerville, Massachusetts today, just about a mile and a half from the W3C headquarters down in Cambridge. I participate in the W3C as an AC member and also on the Positive Working Environments Community Group and some other varied places. I was curious to ask Dom about, we were talking earlier about the transition from sort of the old, very document forward way of producing standards to GitHub-driven standards development. And one of the things that is really tricky is for like the formal standards process is decision making and recording decisions in a fairly kind of specific way. I'm curious how the W3C has changed, its practices over time for how it records or even takes decisions in community groups, so that like consensus has been reached and we can really say that it's a consensus-driven standard.
So I don't know if it has changed a lot via GitHub. I mean, overall, the way we assess consensus in WCC is someone objecting. And of course, if you only ask your two friends, they won't object. So a big part of our process is actually making sure that the specs that we are moving forward gets through what we call wide review, making sure that the community overall, including developers, so part of what I'm trying to get to is developers engagement, but that the community overall of people who would end up using the technology have indeed had a chance to say whether they think the approach is okay or not. And if nobody is objecting, then we think we're good. And there are formal steps in the process, as you know, Jordana, to assess whether that's correct or not. But I guess GitHub helps in figuring out whether an issue has been closed or not, and we can check whether someone has objected in the comment of the issue. But I would say overall, our approach here is still fairly manual. We are in the process of actually building new tools that will help automating some of these assessments so that we can even further streamline our standardization work. But here I would say the distinction between the new way and the old way is mostly that because of GitHub, I think we have gained in exposure, which is great. but which also means that sometimes there are more people that have a chance to object, and so maybe more objections. But overall, the formal bits of assessing consensus hasn't changed all that much at this point.
So it almost makes it, even more of a consensus standard if it's gone through the public GitHub process then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. I can say in the tag that we let our GitHub issues do the talking, basically. So because all of the stuff that we do is really in the GitHub issues and in our minuted conversations. So very often we will link from the GitHub issue back to the minutes or back to the meeting where you can find the minutes where we took the decision, and we will say in our GitHub issue, in our meeting on this day, we took the decision to close this issue, or we took the decision to that we're happy with whatever this thing is. Our way of working is particular to the tag, but I think that's a good approach as long as you trust the longevity of the information that's held in GitHub issues, basically.
I just wanted to share again on GitHub. One of the dashboards that we use is in our developer relation effort is to track how active our community on GitHub is, whether it's growing or not, and so on. And every time I go look at the data, I'm amazed. I mean, there has been overall more than 13,000 contributing one way or another to a Rtc GitHub repository. And every single month we get more than 200 people contributing for the first time. And I guess at the scale of the planet, it's not a lot, but at the scale of our active community, which is around maybe 600 to 800 people working maybe on a regular basis in our specs, getting 200 people some of these contributions are very small, some are actually major. It's really heartening, I think, to see that we have all this attention and interest via GitHub. I think that has been a transformative effect on all.
I think, and I know there's been some debate on this point, but I think that it is useful, even if a developer or somebody, a technologist or designer or somebody a web professional has a bit of information to share regarding if some new technology is being developed and there's data that one particular person has about, I really think that could be used for this use case that I have, or my information from running this website, is that there could be an issue where that could be misused in this way. Even like that kind of information, even if it's not sustained contribution, can be quite useful and important, I think, to the discussion. Yeah. Laura, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, so as a person that recently started to work with W3C, for example, last year we had a chance to go to TPEC and see everybody. It's really interesting how many groups and options a developer has to get involved. Could you please try to mention the different types of groups that are currently working on and some specific trends that you are taking right now? And also something that I was curious about is like how you can open a new group related with standards.
Yeah, so I mean, me personally, I'm involved in 2 working groups today. I mentioned WebRTC. So WebRTC, again, is all these APIs that lets you do audio-video communication in a browser. And that's done by the WebRTC Working Group, which is also developing related APIs, typically access to the camera, but also the ability to record from a webcam or a microphone for that matter, to do screen sharing. So a number of APIs that are needed for the broad usage, I guess, of WebRTC. The other working group I'm involved is the immersive web working group we mentioned earlier, doing WebXR and again, related technologies. But there are, I think, around 36 working groups in the Rtc. I guess one of the most famous one would be the CSS working group, doing everything CSS, and that's a lot. They have more than 100 specifications just for themselves. So that's a very active.
They're a bit greedy, aren't they? Yeah.
But we also have the web apps working group doing, for instance, everything around progressive web apps. The service worker working group doing specifically service worker, web performance for everything performance related, and so on and so on. I won't bother you with all of them, but roughly speaking, we create a working group to work on one or more specifications around reasonably well-defined set of topics. And to your second question, how do we go about creating a new working group? Nowadays, the most traditional approach to creating a working group would be start doing your work in a community group, either an existing one or create a new one, just so that you get lots of people to exchange ideas, find how the technology would actually work and so on. And once you've gathered enough both momentum behind the idea in a community group and enough of a technical proposal, then basically you go to your friendly WCC staff and ask them, we think this is ready for working group. What do you think? Should we start the process with that? And essentially the process is writing a charter for the working group that says exactly what the working group will be doing. And right now I'm personally involved in starting a new working group on a technology called web transport. Again, let me put that link here. So I probably won't go into many of the detail unless people want to hear about it. But web transport is a new API for network operations. Think of it as WebSockets, but with access to the new protocol from the IETF called Quick, which basically gives you better latency and can be applied to more use cases, like in particular for online gaming or for media streaming. And so that proposal started, as you can maybe guess from the document URL, started in the Web Platform Incubator community group, the YCG I mentioned before. And because now it has gathered enough momentum, enough interest from the community, we are spawning a working group to do the formal standardization bits on it.
Anybody who's on the call, especially people, or not only people, but especially people who maybe don't have as much experience in the standardization process, but are but you know, has this sparked any questions for you? Would you like to ask something? Anything that you want to ask about emerging web standards or new things coming to the web, new features coming to the web? I'll give people a chance to think about what questions they might have. And in the meantime, I did want to ask you one more set of, one more line of questioning, Dom, really, which is that W3, although you're famous, you're probably most famous for W3C and web standardization, there is one other area of kind of endeavor that you are also famous for, and that is the running of werewolf games.
I'm not sure what you're speaking about.
So just to give maybe some context. So I mean, WCC is a standard organization, so that may sound, very dreadful and boring. And sometimes it is, but most of the time it isn't. I mean, we are first and foremost, I think, a community of people that are enthusiastic about the web and want to make the web the best platform out there. And, we have people from companies that are in very, very heavy competition in most other contexts, and they are also in competition in WCC context. But my impression from having worked in WCC for quite a long time is that overall the passion for the web overcomes most of this competition on a day-to-day basis. So it's a very pleasant community, lots of good banter and lots of pleasure being together. And one tradition I brought to the organization a while ago has been to run this role-playing game called Werewolves, where basically you take a set of 10 to 20 people who are going to be either a werewolf or a villager in a small village. And through a well-defined process and voting procedures and lots of banter, you get the village to find the werewolves or the werewolves to kill the villagers. And yeah, for better or for worse, not only did I import that in the community, I've also been animating a number of these games with great pleasure. I mean, this is a community of people who love to argue and speak and show their wit. So it's usually lots of fun.
I mean, I remember the first time I was pulled into one of these games in one of the W3C events, and I was just really confused. But it quickly became clear that there's a reason why this is so popular, I think, with the W3C community, in that it mirrors the group dynamics of a working group in many ways. And there are just so many opportunities to kind of like make fun, to poke fun, I think, at the formal W3C process through that lens. So it really lends a good kind of, it creates an esprit de corps, I think, within people that are participating in these groups, and also lets people, because very often at these multi-group meetings that we have, you get people coming who never met each other, or only, and they're not in the same working group, and they're not even in working groups that are in adjacent fields, but they may know each other from the werewolf game, and that creates a sense of community. But in this new world that we're in, where things are moving virtual, how are we going to, so for the next advisory committee meeting, which was due to happen in Seoul in May and now is turning into a virtual meeting, how are we going to translate that for the new virtual world?
Yeah, it's one of my KPI for this year, figuring out virtual werewolf. So it's not, but I'm actually trying to figure that out. So I mean, if you're interested, you should follow the Simple Villager account on Twitter. And whenever I finally get around to figure out how to run werewolf in Zoom, that's where I'll be calling for volunteers to test that out. So.
I'm in. Okay, other questions from the community? Oh, Laura, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to share that that's how I met Dom, and that's actually how Dan introduced me to W3C, and I'm still here, so I think that's positive.
That's trial by fire. I think you were, to be fair, you were kind of trapped in a hotel in Japan during a tsunami or something like that, so you didn't have anywhere else to go. But
yeah, besides that, there is a question by charles.hall. Hi, Charles. And he says, is there a group for haptic standards?
So I guess it depends if you mean by that. So that can cover quite a few things. So we have an API to emit vibration, the well-named vibration API. And you can, ask, for instance, a mobile phone to vibrate following a set of well-defined patterns. And some of that is being reused in the context of gamepads, because gamepads as well have possibilities to vibrate, and that again is likely to find a use in the context of immersive web controllers. And there is also detecting touch on screens. And there are for that the touch events API, which again has been around for quite some time. But then for the broader question of, more advanced haptics, like if you have gloves or things, even bodysuit and so on. Right now, this is still more in the science fiction space of our work. But of course, I mean, I guess overall, a big part of what we try to do as a community in WCC is keep track of some of these changes coming to the technology landscape and try to understand how they map to the web. That's how the work in immersive web started. I mentioned briefly earlier that I'm working around machine learning, and here again, it is about understanding how and where machine learning impacts the web, in the browser, outside of the browser. How do we build a consistent platform on top of these new abilities? And that's what we try to do at WCC is making sure we just don't deliver the plain old platform, which is already great. I mean, don't take me wrong, but also make sure that whatever new features are brought to the technological environment get their proper exposure on the web if relevant. Not all of them are relevant, of course, but many of them can be, and when they can, we want to make sure we understand how that would happen. I hope I answered the haptics question.
Charles, are you, okay. Aha.
Huh. I don't know that so maybe voicing the question from Charles on the chat, beyond the vibration API, looking for something like human preference considerations, like prefers reduce haptics, which I guess is an allusion to another CSS media query, prefer reduce motion, for instance. So, and maybe again, to give a slightly more broader context, CSS recently has introduced a number of media queries that lets developers and designers adapt their style sheet to user preferences. So is reduce motion if you don't want to have animation that would be too fast and might create issue for you. There is contrast preferences as well that can be expressed in CSS. I'm not aware of anything about haptics. I can say that at an event I organized back in November, where we looked, I think, quite broadly at how to make the immersive web accessible to people with disabilities. The notion that a lot of these user preferences may need to be represented one way or another to immersive web developers was surfaced. It's not an easy question because there are also plenty of privacy issues around this. But yeah, especially I can imagine in a context where we get lots more haptic interactions, the possibility of controlling them and reducing them would be useful. But yeah, I'm not aware that anyone has proposed that so far.
But you could propose it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Other questions? Questions for Dom, questions about the web, questions about Werewolf?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Jermaine. I work as a web engineer. I'm not really part of like standardization process, but I'm usually quite interested and I follow them. So I posted like a proposal on the YCG Discourse Forum, and I followed like some very interesting proposals on there. And I'm kind of wondering what's the next step once someone's posted on there, once there's been like a bit of discussion. How do we move that to the next step? What's the kind of like time frame that we should expect? What are the things that we can do to move that forward? It just looks a bit unclear to me.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I hope I'll give a somewhat satisfying answer, but it won't be a very definitive one. So first, Germain, if you want to send me, or you could put it on the chat, but if you also want to follow up by email, feel free to get in touch. In general, the process in the YCG is someone comes up with an idea. As you said, there are discussions. And after some time, if the discussion shows momentum, someone will be expected to produce a proposed specification. And that specification, again, assuming there is further momentum behind the specific proposal, will get adopted by the YCG, which means essentially there will be a repository under the YCG organization on GitHub. And there you will, iterate with whoever was interested in contributing to get to a proposal, maybe some early implementations with browser vendors, and then ultimately to the formal standardization process. Now that's the theory. In practice, especially if you're not in this community on a day-to-day basis, it may be hard to assess how much momentum you've gained, whether you would even know how to start the specification work behind the idea, how to proceed. The YCG chairs, so the people that are responsible for the group, are always extremely reactive. So I think you can find their contact info on ycg.io, but if you can't, also feel free to get in touch with me. And one of the main mission is to accompany people that indeed think they have an idea that has potential, but they don't really know how to move forward with it. So my primary suggestion would be to get in touch with them. They are very nice. We didn't select them; they selected themselves. But their real goal in the group is to accompany the community. So to get in touch with them, and at any point, before, after, during this contact, you should absolutely also feel free to get in touch with me. One of my other roles in W3C is actually to shepherd the community group process. So I'm kind of keeping track of everything happening across community groups, including people wanting to start new community groups or people wanting to get something out of a community group. So yeah, do get in touch. I'll be happy to help. I should warn, I mean, even great ideas can die because of bad reasons. So make sure to, keep faith and to keep pinging the right people. I mean, we are, when I say we, it's literally everyone. I think we are always very busy managing many different tasks in parallel. And so sometimes just knowing that someone cares, knowing that someone is expecting an answer can actually achieve a lot. So I guess I would say the first thing is to make sure that to contact the people that can help.
I mean, I think there's also the factor of implementations, right, Dom? I mean, So
yeah,
yeah.
So that's why I guess maybe too cryptically I was alluding to momentum. A big part of assessing whether an idea has momentum for pre-standardization or standardization is whether browser projects are interested in implementing it, even if only for experimental reasons. And that you can assess by, for instance, seeing whether you got this or that person from this or that vendor participating in the group, in the discussion, sorry. You can assess by seeing whether this was brought up to bug tracking system of one of the browser engines. But even that, I would say, I mean, it is a critical factor. But one of the things that is changing is that browsers are no longer proprietary one company type of project. Chromium, has quite a few companies behind it. So naturally Google, Samsung, Microsoft, but also people from Intel and other companies. Firefox is completely open source as well. Safari use WebKit, which is also an open source project. And some companies have emerged, and I'll mention Igalia, for instance, that can take an idea and turn it into code that can be integrated in one of these open source projects. And that's a new way for ideas that maybe are not getting traction through the priority list of this or that vendor to gain traction, because if already the work of implementation is done, then it's no longer a question of prioritizing this company or that company resources. It's a different question. So again, I won't say that implementation barrier is a small one. It's probably the biggest one. And again, for good reasons. We are talking of shipping codes to billions of users. You don't want to do that lightly. So it is a big barrier, but it is also one where the current ecosystem gives more opportunities than probably ever on the history of the web.
Ashish is asking, or we have a question, will W3C come up with their own browser? Well, actually, you had your own browser for a while.
We did.
Yeah.
So in the early days of WCC, the mission of the consortium was, I guess, a bit more diverse than right now. So right now we are not just, but the stronger focus we have is on standardization and pre-standardization efforts. We also have efforts on training and tool developments, but the core of our work is on standardization. In the early days, we also had a fairly strong set of projects for development, in particular reference implementation. So we had an HTTP server, and we had a project called Amaya, which was both a browser and an HTML editor. It was the incarnation of Tim Berners-Lee, both web inventor and director of the Rtc. His vision for the web was very strongly that it needed to be a two-way medium, not just something you read, but also something you edit. And Amaya was providing a tool that enabled to both view web pages and edit them through HTTP. But as the web platform grew in, I guess, features and capabilities and so on, and given that WCC as an organization is fairly small, we are, as I mentioned earlier, around 50 people. You don't maintain a browser with a team of 50 people while doing many other things. So we stopped doing work on Amaya probably 15 or 16 years ago now. So to the question as to whether WCC would do that, right now, it sounds like the market has a pretty good offering of browsers. I guess there are questions about browser engines, but again, it's probably well beyond the means and the scope of the organization to be developing one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I certainly believe is that the web is made stronger by the diversity of browsers and the diversity of engines that are out there. I think for those of us who kind of lived through I would call it the web's dark age, you know, kind of the early 2000s, when Internet Explorer had kind of sewn up a huge percentage of the market. We know that in that environment, innovation tends to stall, and that it's the push-pull, I think, between different participants in the ecosystem. That's certainly something that we take seriously in Samsung Internet. We are part of the web standards work, and we're also part of the Chromium project. And it's important to have that kind of, so you know, people ask us, you know, why does Samsung have their own browser? Well, it's precisely because so that we can have our own opinion about how to present a web page, how to present the UI for a browser, what other features should exist within the browser, what the roadmap should be for browser features, for developer-facing features, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's definitely one reason. One thing also, just to channel Diego for a second, who is having issues with his audio, but just to mention one of the other things that we're working on right now is foldables. I don't have one with me, unfortunately. I wish I could kind of show it on the screen, but we have the two different foldable devices that Samsung has come out with recently, and Microsoft also has devices that have folding screens. And we started a conversation a few months back about what new web standards we need to, or what could be added to the web standards in order to support foldable UI, or to help support folding phones, folding devices, helps support web developers that are building web UI with foldable devices in mind. And so we have an explainer that Diego wrote. There's also some work that Microsoft have done. Right now there are some proposals that are filtering through various places. I think the Devices and Sensors Working Group is one of them, which is really good to see that actually happening through that kind of W3C standardization process. So yeah, I think that's interesting, because how do you enable a kind of UI where the minute you start to fold the device, there's some kind of explanatory animation that happens to kind of show the user what's going on, or the UI changes in a way that makes sense for the device in a kind of right hand or 90-degree approach versus the kind of fully folded out kind of approach. All those kinds of things that we're interested in kind of pursuing that. Yeah, the fold, as in below the fold, Charles? Yeah, okay, yeah. It is for those of us who've been in the web for a while, there's this concept of below the fold, which used to mean what's below the part of the web page that has loaded on the screen, what's below it. But I think, and it comes from print, because it comes from the print newspaper industry, where anything that was below the fold is below where the newspaper folded in half. But now maybe we can reinvent that phrase again. Other questions for, yeah, what's a newspaper, right? I still get a newspaper delivered to my door, And by the way, the New York Times International Edition is still delivering through this crisis. So I think that that's pretty cool, actually. It's the only way you can get the crossword here. Come on, seriously. People. Any other questions?
So while people think about that question, I'll just pitch that if you've been to the WCC website, you know it's a work of wonder and amazement, but it could be improved. And we are starting a redesign process, and one of our main targets here is to make sure that developers, among others, can find what they need there. So there is both a survey that is being run if you're a WCC website user or potential user to help guide the redesign process. And there is also a series of user stories. So if you've ever said anything bad about the WCC website, you now have a moral duty to go there and express how it could be better, how it could better match your needs. So I've put a link to the blog post.
Sorry, Ada?
By that, you mean all users of the W3C website?
Too close, Ada. So yeah, go to the website, fill the survey. I think it's a very short one, and even better if you can do the user story exercise. Hopefully it will get us to a much better future WCC website.
So speaking of websites, I think there might be one other thing to plug here, and which could be the involvement that W3C has now had for a couple of years with MDN, which we're also involved in MDN. So for those who use the web, you likely are using MDN. You know, actually, when I think about how developers engage with W3C specifications, I usually think that they are probably reading about it first on something like MDN, and then clicking through to the specification if they actually want to see the kind of more formalized specification. And that, so how is W3C working with MDN to kind of help facilitate that?
So yeah, I just put another link on the chat. So MDN, as some will know, is originally a project from Mozilla, documenting everything on the web for developers. And I think it was maybe 3 years ago now, 2.5 maybe, Mozilla started this product advisory board, where both Dan and Jory actually sit along with me. And other companies, other persons. And the goal of this product advisory board is to make sure that MDN grows, that it fulfills the need of developers, that it collaborates with other related projects. And of course, as you said, Dan, a lot of the content on MDN is actually a reflection, a digestion of our standards made more approachable for developers. And so, yeah, part of my job the past few years has been to make sure that our work can be more easily adopted in MDN, make sure that MDN can also bring useful input from developers back to WCC. And a big project that the MDN Product Advisory Board led over the last year was a developer survey, and it ended up being the largest ever developer survey. Let me, I can put the link. Oh,
yeah, it's always worth highlighting this because I think it's just such a great survey and really, really good viewpoint of the developer community.
So this was a survey that ran in July and August, and I think there were over 70,000 developers taking the survey partially and almost 30,000 doing the full thing. And the full thing was a fairly lengthy effort. So it was a really, really deep insight on what the developers saw as improvements needed for the web, what they thought already worked well, and what could be made better. And if everything goes all right, there should be a 2020 edition of that survey, both to measure how these needs have evolved in a year, either because the platform itself has evolved or the environment has evolved, and also to get more details about some of the aspects that the previous survey didn't cover. So watch out for this. Again, it's already been extremely impactful in our discussions in WCC to get a better understanding of the pain points from developers. And I expect that future editions will even grow in their value because we can track the evolution of these pain points over time.
Well, unless there are others with additional questions for Dom or just generally about new web features, I think it might be time to close the event off in that case. Any last words before we close off, Dom?
Oh, that was for me. I thought.
Yeah.
Well, again, I put my email address earlier. You can also follow me both on Twitter as Don't Call Me Dom and Don't Ask. You can also follow WCC Dev, which I maintain with my colleague Marie, who's on the chat as well. And feel free again by email if you have any question on how to get involved. What is this whole standardization business you've been blathering about? I'm happy to help.
And from my end, you can follow us at Samsung Internet, and you can go to our developer hub at samsunginter.net to find out the latest blog posts from us, many of which are going to be about emerging web features and web standards, because our team is involved in web developer advocacy and web standards development. So I really want to thank Dom for joining us today. I want to thank everybody for dialing in and asking great questions and engaging. And if you have any feedback for me or for us about how the event ran or what topics you'd like to see, there's also a blog post from Laura, which maybe Laura can paste into the chat while I'm talking, which is asking for people for their ideas for future events. We're running a series of office hours like this, and we're also going to run probably monthly a more formal meetup type thing where people make presentations, and we're also engaging in lots of other virtual events. For those who are involved in the kind of the web community and especially the events community, you'll know there's been the reaction to the current situation, which people keep calling it, is that there's been a lot of creativity in terms of people bringing events online, taking events that were offline, moving them online, bringing online totally new events and new ways in which people are engaging. Obviously, we all hope that we can once again, and I'm sure that we will, come back to the normal way of actually meeting in person occasionally as well. But I'm actually really excited about all these virtual ways in which people are engaging as well, and I think it's good to see that reaction from the community. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining, and I'm going to close it off with that.